You know Bomberman, right? I mean, you clicked on this video, you probably know Bomberman. You know, the cartoony-looking robot from video games that drops bombs everywhere. Not this one, that's Bombman, not Bomberman. Bomberman was the one from Hudson Soft, and he had his own franchise. Would you believe that this little guy starred in over 80 video games? Well, you shouldn't, because I didn't count the mobile games in that total. With them, it's well over 100. And almost all of those games were released in a relatively small time span. The reason there's so many Bombermen is that in the 90s, Hudson turned the character into their corporate mascot, their very own Mario. And so they made a mountain of video games starring the character. Bomberman even got his own TV shows. Plural. There was just one small problem. Hudson put their money in the wrong bank. In the late 90s, the bank that housed the company's primary assets collapsed. And that set off a financial death spiral that they never recovered from. Bomberman was one of the two bright spots in the company's portfolio, but the 2000s were a slow dissolve for Hudson, selling themselves off bit by bit to Konami, scaling things back more and more until they just had to close the doors. In those waning days of Hudson Soft, one of the things that they tried to do to save the company was boost Bomberman by remaking it from the ground up. In one case, they handed it off to Sony. At the same time, they tried making their own Bomberman for American audiences. Turns out neither of those were successful. A decade later, Konami was digging through their closet and realized they owned Bomberman, and they tried a two-pronged approach to restart the franchise. One traditional, the other not. These three games, born of weird gambles, each tried to take Bomberman in a new direction all their own. And that's what I'm here to look at. The weird offshoots of a series that had already gone in some weird directions. Before that, how did I get here? Well, usually I spend my time documenting the libraries of Japanese game consoles, making a video for every single game on the platform. Yesterday I posted my video on Bomberman for the PC Engine, and that game is the moment when Bomberman became Bomberman. That got me thinking about the last days of the Bomberman franchise, particularly one notorious Bomberman game, and that sent me down a rabbit hole. To give you an idea of how we got to the end, let's take a brief walkthrough of its evolution. Bomberman was originally a computer game released in 1983, a game that wound up getting released in Europe under the title Eric and the Floaters. That's a game title that really conveys the idea of 1980s British microcomputers. Bomberman in this game is a clown, and in this arcade-style game, your goal is to blow up all of the balloons that are floating around the stage. To do that, you drop bombs, they make cross-shaped explosions a few seconds later, and they can blow up some of the walls that are in your way. There are no power-ups, just secret treasures that are worth extra points if you can figure out how to collect them. Technically, you don't have to blow up all of the balloons, or floaters to my British audience. Just finding the exit is sufficient. Now we jump ahead a couple of years, and Hudson dusts off the basic concept and makes another game titled Bomberman. Now things are starting to take shape. You have to destroy all the enemies before you can advance to the next level, and there's more enemies than just those floaters. Every level has one power-up hidden in it, something that might let you place an additional bomb that can cause a chain reaction, or extend the radius of your bomb's explosions. And now Bomberman is a robot. A chubby little white robot. Not that the box cover told you that. The character redesign came about because Hudson was reusing some of their existing art. The previous year they had made a version of Loadrunner, and Bomberman was one of the enemy robots from that game. In fact, if you clear 50 stages of Bomberman, then you get the happy ending where Bomberman becomes Loadrunner. This Bomberman was a decent-sized hit for Hudson, though everything was a decent-sized hit for Hudson in those days. And so naturally, Hudson followed up Bomberman with absolutely nothing. Okay, not quite completely true, but the follow-up a couple years later was Bomber King, which reworked the game entirely. That one was released in the US as Robo Warrior. And unless somebody told you that this game had that tenuous connection to Bomberman, you'd never know it. The real breakthrough came a few years later, 1990, when Hudson released, Bomberman. Now I know what you're saying, this looks exactly the same. And you're right, that's because it is exactly the same. What happened was Nintendo came to Hudson, hat in hand, looking for popular old software that they could release on the Famicom Disk System. The add-on hardware for the Famicom that wasn't doing especially well. Hudson offered up Bomberman, and that seems to have sparked something. Because pretty much the exact length of time for the development of a Game Boy game later, Hudson released Bomber Boy, otherwise known as Atomic Punk or Dynablaster. Now here we go, a new game that was very obviously Bomberman, and it added things like having different kinds of terrain, and theming the enemies around those areas. But the real magic was that you could use the link cable to connect two Game Boys together and make your Bombermen fight. Now things were starting to come together, and a few months after Bomber Boy came, Bomberman. Hudson wasn't very creative with their titles. This third game, titled Bomberman, was released for the PC Engine, and it's the one where things finally all come together. Particularly because this Bomberman offered a 5-player battle mode, and people loved that, so that's what the series became. From this point on, things move a bit faster. The next few years brings a flurry of Bomberman games that are in a similar style, offering a single-player mode where you blow up monsters roaming the maze, and battle modes that became more and more customizable as time went on. Bomberman was now a party game, something where you could have tournaments with your friends. And this is where Hudson starts spreading out the brand. Besides the many, many games that follow the standard Bomberman formula, you've got Bomberman as a 3D platformer, Bomberman as a racing game, Bomberman as a tactical RPG, and not gonna lie here, I've been very tempted to make a video about just that one game. I'm just scratching the surface here. For a while, if Hudson could fit a cute robot that could throw bombs into a genre, then they did it. The point here is that, as a brand, Bomberman became pretty diluted. There might have been a core Bomberman game concept, but that was only a small portion of Bomberman games. Which would likely be why, in those last days, Hudson felt so free to try to reinvent the series. When the core's been lost, why not try rebooting? And in 2006, they rebooted it twice.
Three, one, zero.
2006. The first Bomberman reboot to reach shelves is Bomberman Bakufu Sentai Bombermen. It was the first Bomberman game to reach Sony's new PlayStation Portable, and it shouldn't be confused with the next Bomberman game on that system, which released only 3 months later, which was titled Bomberman. Yet Hudson had a bad habit of just calling games Bomberman. The title could be loosely translated as Shockwave Soldiers Bomberman, but really the important thing about the title is that it's referencing Super Sentai, the very recently cancelled, but before this very long-running, series of superhero shows. And if you don't want to deal with the Japanese side of things here, you can just say Power Rangers. It's not really the same, but I'm not going to complain. Hudson didn't make Bakufu Sentai Bombermen themselves. This one is a Sony product, through and through. Developed and published by Sony Computer Entertainment Incorporated. I'd suspect that Hudson was trying to hand off the reimaginings of Bomberman and keep the traditional Bomberman to themselves, but, well, we'll get to that with the next game. The big thing about Bakufu Sentai Bombermen is that you don't have a Bomberman, you've got 5 of them. or 4 Bombermen and 1 Bomberwoman. One common thing with these reimaginings is that it seems like people thought that what Bomberman really needed was some estrogen. The best place to see the differences that this game has from the standard Bomberman is in the story mode. After an almost certainly doomed boss fight with Bomberman Red, you're given your choice of 5 characters, each designated by color: red, blue, green, yellow, and pink. And initially, you're just playing with regular Bombermen. Well, they have a voxel look, but it's just standard Bomberman. And this is the big pattern for the story mode. You play 5 stages as an appropriately colored cartoony Bomberman, and then you play 9 stages as the super heroic bomber person, and then once you have cleared all of that with every single character, then a boss unlocks for each of them to defeat. Those traditional Bomberman stages and those 9 stages that you have to play first are identical for all of the characters. So all this is doing is dragging out the game a lot. Now, the stages aren't bad. Most of them have some kind of funky gimmick, like conveyor belts where you can switch the direction, or pipes that channel explosions around. Basically, you're getting a tour of all of the multiplayer arenas as you play this mode. It's just, you have to play the entire game 5 times before you're allowed to face the bosses. Now, you might have noticed that all of the heroes look very different. And then you'd go, aha, I bet they changed up the gameplay with each one. Well, yes. Each character has a special move and a super bomb. The super bomb meter builds up every time one of your regular bombs explodes, and for most of those characters, that super bomb effect is useless. Their special abilities can be used at will, and while there are a couple of unique ones, most of them are just copies of the power-ups that you could collect. You wind up with 2 characters that do something special, and 3 characters who might as well be regular Bombermen. Red Bomberman can punch destructible blocks like he's playing Pengo, and send those sliding along the ground. Unfortunately, enemies caught by those blocks aren't crushed. So this is mainly a way to reshape the stage a little bit, and possibly escape when you're trapped. His super bomb is an aerial strike that covers a large area a few seconds after he brings it in. Pink's special ability is that she can jump. This sends her 2 steps forward and over any obstacle in the way. Since she can use this at will, Pink almost cannot be trapped and can easily deal with most situations. Her super bomb is a flamethrower shot that goes out straight in front of her. It fires instantaneously when you press the button. Red is a useful character, and Pink is completely broken. And then there's the remaining 3. Green can kick the bombs, exactly like getting the kick power-up, and his super bomb is a lightning effect that lingers slightly longer than the regular bomb. But the lightning effect doesn't remain around long enough to really make a difference. Yellow's special ability is the line bomb. He can place an entire line of bombs at once, just like the line bomb power-up. That does mean he starts with an extra bomb drop, though. They don't make him totally useless. His super bomb is a giant block bomb that doesn't get set off by other bombs and has a super long timer. So something that's not really useful. Blue's special ability is that he can move at a high speed, and he makes a really annoying sound when he does that. His super bomb looks a little bit like the bombable terrain, except it doesn't really because it's pulsating and it's only around for a couple seconds anyways. That one is also completely useless. The whole hook of Bakufu Sentai Bomberman is that team, and there's absolutely no reason to use over half of them. When it gets to multiplayer, the advantages for Pink and Red are so extreme that you might as well just play the classic mode where nobody has any abilities. In which case, why aren't you just playing the regular Bomberman game? There are a few more troublesome quirks to Bakufu Sentai Bomberman. As is traditional at this point for the Bomberman series, you start out very weak and have to collect power-ups. So explosions that only hit 1 square away, and everyone except Yellow can only drop 1 bomb at a time, and Yellow only gets 2. The power-ups you collect carry over between stages, so that's good. And if you get killed and have to continue, you at least retain your bomb and explosion power-ups, though other super abilities go away. On the other hand, if you stop your run for any reason, like switching characters, then you go back to your default power level. You might recall that I mentioned that the bosses become unlocked only after you complete every other stage with every character. And that means if you jump straight into the boss with the last character you were using, then they'll be ready to fight. For everyone else, you have to go and replay some more stages. Otherwise, you're going to have a really tough time fighting the bosses. That said, it's usually a pretty good strategy to just drop bombs until your super meter builds up and then use that to attack. But it's way easier to defeat the bosses if you've got a few power-ups. It took me about 4 hours to completely beat the story mode here, so it's not like this is a huge game, but it's a game where 80% of it, literally, is repetition. There are a few more problems with Bakufu Sentai Bomberman, particularly that really close-in camera. When you have bombs that can cross the entire stage, you kinda need to see the entire stage. You do have a small amount of control over the camera, but it's never giving you enough. And in case you hadn't noticed, those character designs are really awful. I get that they were trying to do some comedically exaggerated forms, but they really do not work on those 3D models. And as you have classic mode, which uses a kind of voxel style look, it just makes the superhero stuff look even more awful. Of course, as annoying as those two complaints are in this game, it's nothing compared to where we're going next. I came away from Bakufu Sentai Bomberman feeling that it was just mediocre. Not bad enough to really hate. In fact, it's the best of the 3 games I'm focusing on here. It's just not good enough to justify playing it over any other Bomberman game. If you're attempting to revitalize a franchise, you gotta do a lot better than this. A few months after Sony released Bakufu Sentai Bomberman, Hudson took their own swing at changing up Bomberman. And, well... Bomberman Act 0. Just the title of the game has become a punchline. It stands amid such luminaries as Superman 64 and Aliens Colonial Marines as one of the most notoriously bad games of all time. Now, there's a funny thing about notoriety, is that it often results in interest. Yeah, flying Superman through those rings and then trying to lift a car isn't much fun, but how many of you watching this video have played Superman 64 specifically because of its reputation? Just trying it to see what all the fuss was about. And that's the boat I was in with Bomberman Act 0. Yeah, people say it's one of the worst games ever, but I needed to play it and experience it for myself. So I pulled down my copy and decided to give it a whirl. Now, a quick digression here, because I went through a lot of trouble for this. The journey actually starts with another terrible game, Sonic the Hedgehog, which I started playing on January 1st to get the anniversary year of its release kicked off right. My copy of it was a bit scuffed up, and my 360 had a little bit of trouble reading it sometimes, but I could still play it fine. And then, once I had inflicted enough pain on myself, I decided to switch to Bomberman Act 0. And then my Xbox 360 wouldn't read the disc. A little bit of testing and experimentation later, it looked like I had a dying laser on my hands, and the fact that the Sonic disc was roughed up helped it thanks to error correction kicking in. Initially I thought about tweaking the resistance on the laser, but I decided since I was prying open everything anyways, I'd go ahead and do a total refurb on my 360 drive. 3 weeks later, I finally had everything I needed. A couple people were really slow in shipping to me. Got my system opened up the CD-ROM drive, and replaced the laser. And it still wasn't reading. Well, as it turns out, I got some bad advice on which style of laser I needed. Microsoft's weird naming scheme for their consoles didn't help there. So then I got the correct laser unit in, replaced it, and then the drive seemed to be running, but it started making a horrible grinding noise. Fortunately, I wasn't an idiot about this, and I had a sacrificial disk I was using. Pull the whole thing apart again, and it turned out that the screw that moves the laser assembly around so it can read the whole disk was stripped, and that was making everything fly everywhere when the drive ran. And of course it turned out that I didn't have a screw handy to fix that. So after spending $10 to get a 0.01 cent screw, I reassembled everything again, and it finally worked. All of that just so I could play Bomberman Act Zero, and then find out that it was a nothing game. As a game, it is one of the most hollow, shallow experiences that I have ever encountered. Now, the positive thing about that entire ordeal I went through was that I spent some time gathering background information on the later era of Bomberman, and went, hey, some of these other games might be interesting to talk about. Because if all I had was Bomberman Act Zero, I'd be tossing this video in the trash. If you're not familiar with it, Bomberman Act Zero was an attempt to make the franchise grim and gritty. That's a phrase that originated with comics, because for a while the major publishers decided that they wanted to get away from comics' reputation as being for kids by throwing as much violence and angst into their books as they could. The result wasn't stories for adults, it was stories that teenagers thought were for adults. And these grim and gritty reboots often stomped all over what people liked about the original. So anyways, Bomberman Act Zero. The most important thing to know about Bomberman Act Zero is that it is not intended as a single-player experience. There's a faint outline of a single-player mode that you can take part in, but it only consists of a ladder of matches against bots. You play in the same arenas. They just change from one dim, desaturated color palette to another dim, desaturated color palette if you progress far enough. Now, if you clear 100 levels, then there's actually a cinematic and an ending, plus a promise for a sequel. It would have been titled Bomberman the Genesis, and for some reason, it was never released. Now, you might notice that I'm not showing off that ending, and that's because it's insanely difficult to get to it. You have one life in Bomberman Act Zero, and no continues. I played the game for 3 hours, and my record was level 9. Not that I'd want to keep playing and see if I could do better, because Bomberman Act Zero goes out of its way to drain all of the fun from Bomberman. Let's start with the story. I was going to do a Christian Bale-style Batman voice while reading this. A nerdy YouTuber trying to sound tough would both be stupid and mock-worthy, and a perfect parallel to Bomberman Act Zero's story. But have you seen how much text there is here? I'd choke on my own phlegm before I got to the end of it. Short version. It's a post-apocalyptic future. There's an automated system that keeps cloning new Bombermen and making them fight, and there you go. Now you got it. When I start things up from here, I'm immediately yelled at because the game can't communicate with the servers. As far as I can tell, the servers are still online if you want to play Bomberman Act Zero against people, but since I don't have an Xbox Live account, I'll never know for sure. Hey, maybe there's a thriving Bomberman Act Zero multiplayer scene out there, but somehow I kinda doubt it. Of course, the multiplayer here is online only. Yeah, Bomberman was a party game where you got together with your friends. That's 2006. Multiplayer in the same room is dead. How dare you even suggest that two people sit on the same couch and play a game together? That would be obscene. The only thing under the options menu is picking the color and shape of your bomber person. If you choose to take a bomber woman, then you'll quickly be reminded that this game was made in 2006 because they've added jiggle physics to Bomberman. For the single player, there's 2 different modes, though they wind up playing mostly the same. First is FPB mode, which stands for First Person Bomber. Now, here I am playing that mode, and what do you notice? That's right, First Person Bomber mode is third person. This is First Person Bomberman. In fact, it's the second Bomberman game ever released, Bomberman 3D. It put that clown Bomberman from the original game and made his levels wizardry-style dungeons. It does not play well. You have to watch the radar to know if enemies are approaching, and navigating that space in half steps is really annoying. There's very good reason that nobody's gone back to this Bomberman. But back to the Bomberman disaster I was talking about originally, Act 0. The misnomered first-person bomber mode gives you a life bar, and that's because your view is so close that you can't see anything that's happening on the stage. It is very likely that you're going to get hit by stuff that's off-screen, especially after a few stages when you have to start dealing with bombs that go through walls. Your opponents also have health bars here, though in the early stages they can still be taken out with one explosion. You might think that having health bars, poor viewing area, and big open areas would make matches go very slowly, and you'd be right. If you want to play with the entire field in view, and with the regular Bomberman rules, then you want standard mode. There, a single explosion will kill you instantly. Now, it is possible to get parts that will give you extra lives, or restore some health if you're in the first-person mode, but the whole time I was playing, I never saw a single heart. So that's just more fun. If you're wondering if there's any difference in the endings for the standard mode and first-person bomber, well, there isn't. In fact, the matches are exactly the same, except in first-person bomber, you've got those life bars. Something that you're going to notice when you start any stage is that the camera violates the 180 rule. That's the rule of cinematography that basically says that you shouldn't flip the camera around the person since it confuses the viewer. Well, here, your zoom in as you start the match has an upside-down camera perspective. You're looking at things as though you're at the top of the maze instead of the bottom. So when the match starts, everything flips to the other side. It makes it hard to spot yourself in those first few seconds. Those intros and exits from every stage are really, really long as well. It's not loading anything new, so I have no idea why everything plays out so slowly. It's just one more thing that makes Bomberman Act 0 no fun to play. And just in case you were wondering about the achievements here, pretty much all of them fail to enable unless you're playing online. Even stuff like counting how many bombs you dropped. So that's one more reason to never play this game, if you needed any more. I wouldn't be so down on Bomberman Act 0 if it played decently as a Bomberman game. And it really, really does not. There's no special stage features, just the one arena with bricks that you can explode. The AI is in that weird space where it's too brain dead to be an active threat, but just there enough that it plays defensively pretty well. So basically it's always standing just out of reach. You'll drop all the bombs you have and then it'll take one step around the corner. The computer players aren't attacking each other, so you have to work extra hard to trap them. And of course, in standard mode, any single mistake is an instant game over, and even the first-person bomber doesn't leave you much room for error. So you have the most generic stage possible, looking as ugly as possible, with extra weird-looking bomber person designs. No local multiplayer, no enemy variety, single-player modes designed to be impossible, achievements that rely on multiplayer even if they don't need it. I'd say in every reasonable aspect, Bomberman Act 0 is a worse playing game than the first NES version. At least that game gave you a variety of enemies, bonus stages, and you could continue if you got a game over. Personally, I think if you're rebooting your franchise, you should at least do better than the version that was 20 years old at that point. The way I've heard it, Bomberman Act 0 turned into this train wreck specifically because the Japanese developers at Hudson were trying to make a Bomberman game that appealed to Americans and weren't listening to the Americans who were telling them, no, not like that. Of course, that version of events comes from the American side of Hudson, so I'll take it with a grain of salt. Bomberman X-Zero turned out so poorly that I've encountered people who think that it's the end of the Bomberman franchise. But it wasn't really. Hudson published a few more Bomberman games on the Wii and DS, and they even developed one of those DS games themselves. And there were mobile games that were keeping the brand alive. But Hudson was fading away fast. Notable staff, even entire teams, were leaving the company, and I found less and less reason to keep the Hudson brand around. And the very last game that Hudson developed before the company closed forever was Deca Sporta 3D Sports for the Nintendo 3DS, released in 2011, the low point for the 3DS. However, Konami chose to revive Bomberman, eventually. And they decided to bring it back with two games. One, a very traditional Bomberman game, whose title indicated that it was a continuation of the classic series, Super Bomberman R, and then the other, which was something else entirely. Well, that was certainly, boisterous. Bomber Girl is what I would consider to be the most recent Bomberman spin-off game. There have been a couple of Bomberman games since its 2018 release, but those are in the classic Bomberman mold. Bomber Girl was following current trends at the time of its release. Actually, that's not really true. It was about 5 years behind current trends at the time of its release. You see, Bomber Girl was an attempt to make Bomberman into a MOBA. And here's where I get thrown off a bit, because I don't like that genre at all. But that's just personal taste. I had a whole bit here about how Bomber Girl was worse than Bomberman X-Zero, but I think that's being unfair to it since MOBAs aren't my thing. If Bomber Girl was an unofficial game inspired by Bomberman and turning that into a MOBA, instead of being part of the Bomberman series produced by Konami, then I wouldn't talk about it at all. I'd live and let live. What I'm saying here is, take my views on Bomber Girl as a MOBA with a grain of salt. Of course, the fact that Bomber Girl engages in some now standard monetization schemes that actively undermine how the game plays, making it a significantly worse experience, and causing it to be even more impenetrable to newcomers, well, that is something that I will judge it for. Bomber Girl is one of those arcade games where you have to have the special card to store your data and unlocks that you get, but it's still an arcade game. So at least keep in mind that it is intended to be played in very short bursts. In 2021, Konami released a version of Bomber Girl for PCs as a subscription-based game, though not even a year later they switched it to free-to-play. There was also a refresh during this time that updated the game to Rainbow Bomber Girl, but you don't see that title in the PC version, so we'll just ignore that. If for some reason you want to play Bomber Girl after watching this video, you'll need to create an account at Konami's eAmusement site, and once you've done that, you can download the installer. As of early 2026, Bomber Girl is still being supported by Konami, but that support seems to come down to adding a new skin every month or so, based on a character from another Konami game, like Tokimeki Memorial. When you first start the game, you can play a set of tutorial missions. We're going to skip over those since I'll explain the game to you. And then there's two game modes, the primary multiplayer mode, and a single player mode where you play against bots. Though the single player mode seems to primarily exist for checking out the stages and trying out the stuff that you pulled from the gacha system. So let's take a look at how this plays. As a MOBA, this is a team game, and every team has 4 players. There's 4 different predefined roles, and every role on the team has to be filled. Your team always appears in blue, the enemy team always appears in red. Your goal is to make your way across the map and blow up the enemy base. The base and other structures have a big health bar, so it takes a lot more than just one bomb to knock them out. In between your spawn point and the enemy base are a host of stage obstacles, gates that will have to be blown open, a respawn point that you'll have to capture and keep clear, and of course, hundreds of bombable bricks. Blowing up a brick could reveal a power-up, and 3 of these are familiar to any Bomberman fan: the explosion radius up, the bomb quantity up, and a speed up. And the 4th is experience points. Experience is for the whole team, not just you. And once the team reaches level 2, then everyone unlocks their special class ability. When the team reaches level 5, then you unlock your ultimate ability. Leveling occurs really fast. You'll probably be at level 2 less than 15 seconds into the match, and at level 5 before a full minute has passed. One more thing about destroying or capturing structures: once a spot has been weakened, there will be a big ring, and someone on your team will have to stand in that ring and hit the capture button. The reason for this goes back to the arcade game, where a giant flashing button would emerge from the cabinet when you could capture something. So it's something that was part of the tactile experience of the original arcade game, but on the PC version it's just there. Those facilities, installations, whatever you want to call them, the things that you're attacking can defend themselves a couple different ways. They can launch bombs high into the air, they can unleash wide area attacks, and they can spawn small enemies. There's only one type of enemy that they spawn, a little blob that moves towards you, which means they aren't really serious threats. They're more things that get in your way while you're dealing with all of the other problems. Okay, it's time to get into the nitty-gritty of the characters. As you might expect from the title Bomber Girl, they're all women. And naturally, as you pull different things from the gacha machine, you can dress them up in different outfits, give them a different set of abilities, and change their vocalizations. That is the preset list of 10 lines that they can say when you push a number key. Each of the 4 different roles has about 8 different characters. When you first start playing, you only have the base one available, and you'll have to pull extra characters out of the gacha machine if you want them. As Bomber Girl is a gacha game where the characters are women, they of course have sexy poses for you. Particularly when your character gets blown up, you'll get a picture of them with their clothes blasted off. The first role on the list is Bomber, and your default character for that is Shiro, or White in Japanese. Shiro is very obviously modeled on the main Bomberman from Bomberman. The Bomber is basically playing Bomberman. The role on the team is opening paths and destroying those structures. Bombers can upgrade their explosion radius quite a bit, and get the ability to drop large numbers of bombs. However, the delay in their explosions and lower speed means that they're not very good at attacking other players. As for the Bomber's default special abilities, she has a penetrating bomb at level 2, and that has an explosion that will go straight through bricks, allowing you to destroy whole lines. Her level 5 ability is a giant bomb that destroys a large area. The next character archetype is the Attacker, and the default character is Orin, who is very, very loosely based on the Contra series. You'd have to read the extra material to learn that, because there's no way you could tell just by looking at her. The Attacker can upgrade their speed quite a bit, but their bombs and explosion upgrades are very limited. The default extra abilities that the Attacker gets are a jump slash that attacks an entire line. It has the advantage of going over obstacles, so you can get inside sealed areas with this. The default ultimate attack is a huge swing in front of her. It's just a way to sweep the area in front of you. The next archetype is the Shooter, and as you might expect from that name, they specialize in long-range attacks. The Shooter's explosions can be upgraded quite a bit, but not the quantity of bombs that they drop. The default character here is Emira, who as far as I can tell doesn't have a connection to any Konami or Hudson game. The Shooter's default special abilities are long-range attacks, but these attacks are only really effective against other players. They don't do significant damage against structures. The level 2 default special ability makes 3 orbs appear above the Shooter, and then you can fire them individually by pressing the special attack button again. These will home in on nearby targets. The default level 5 ultimate attack is a giant blast. It just fires out straight in front of her. The final role is the blocker, and naturally they're focused totally on defense. The blocker has the highest health of any character, but their attack power is pretty weak. The default character for the blocker is Momoko, and her outfit is supposed to be reminiscent of different Bomberman enemies. The default level 2 ability summons 3 bricks. Besides blocking paths, these can be used to cover up the advanced respawn point, preventing enemies from using it unless they clear the pad again. The default level 5 ability is a heal, and it can restore both structures and players. Okay, here's where things are going to get a little bit murky for a few minutes. As I said, MOBAs aren't my thing, but I think the basic mechanics here are nice for a simple, arcadey assault game. Obviously, the real test here is how does it work in a multiplayer match? I had to play with other people, but MOBAs are notoriously bad at onboarding new players. Even if all things were equal, and they aren't remotely equal, a team-based game like this will be completely disrupted by a new player showing up and trying to figure out what to do. That's something that's not fun for the new player, and it's not much fun for the very few regulars that are still remaining in Bomber Girl. I think it's very unfair for a team to get stuck with me. So when I was playing online, I only played the Bomber role. It was the one that I felt was the most straightforward and safe for a new player. No messy techniques, or trying to balance attack and defense, just clear a path for people. Of course, everyone else I was playing with has long since figured out the optimal paths through the levels. They all know exactly what you should be doing at any given moment. I'm just glad that Bomber Girl relies on emotes for communication instead of voice chat. Based on the crowd I saw when I was playing in what was early evening Japan time, it felt like there really weren't that many remaining Bomber Girl players. Or at least not that many ranked low enough to get paired up with me. Of course, virtually everyone I saw had alternate outfits, characters who were significantly better than the default, and special abilities that were more effective than the ones that you start with. The first time you complete an online match in a day, you'll get 3 gacha tickets. And then you'll take it over to the exchange and discover that you have to have 10 gacha tickets to actually use the gacha machine. So back you go. You have to play 5 matches in order to get your 10 tickets, and then you get 1 pull of the slot machine. Okay, let's cut the Bomber Girl footage and have a serious talk for a couple of minutes. I'm going to put my cats on screen for a little while here. As I write this, it's 2026. I doubt that there is anyone watching this video who isn't well aware of the harmful effects of gacha mechanics, loot boxes, microtransactions, everything that's gone horribly wrong in video games in the past 15 years. You don't need me to be one more online person to tell you, hey, did you know this is bad? And yet here I am making a video featuring a game that is actively harmful to people. I might as well be talking about Konami's Bomberman slot machine. And when I wrote that previous line, I was making it up, but it turns out that actually exists. My personal rule has been, I avoid things with microtransactions, and I absolutely never play anything with a loot box or gacha. Even players who would never put money into it still contribute to a game pulling in the people who would. So my point here is, don't play Bomber Girl. Seriously, do not play Bomber Girl. It is a product designed to make its players' lives worse while paying for slightly shinier wallpaper in the Konami corporate boardroom. Yeah, just the wallpaper, since I'm sure Bomber Girl's income at this point is a rounding error on Konami's balance sheet. Okay, with my conscience slightly assuaged, let's go back to that Bomber Girl poll and see what I get. Obviously, the odds of getting a new character or ability are astronomically low, but maybe this is one of those games that tries to sucker players in by giving them some mildly good stuff with their first try or two to get them hooked. I got a new voice line. Yeah, that sounds about right. So that's 3 attempts to rejuvenate Bomberman, and 3 games that completely failed to do so. Bomberman Bakufu Sentai Bomberman had good intentions, it just had some really poor implementation, and too little content spread way too thin. Bomberman X-Zero had even less. A game so shallow that the 8-bit Bomberman games outdo it in almost every regard. And it's all wrapped up in some of the ugliest 2006 era presentations that you could imagine. And Bomber Girl brought all of the things that have gone wrong in video games over the past 15 years and stuffed them into Bomberman. At least the other 2 games aren't trying to exploit addictive personalities. The most real-world harm that Bomberman Act Zero will do to you is however much you spend to buy a copy. $9.99 with free shipping in my case. At this point, it seems unlikely that anyone will try something like these 3 games again. Anytime Konami feels the need to bump Bomberman for some nostalgia money, they can release another Super Bomberman game. In fact, while I was editing this footage, Konami announced a Super Bomberman collection. I kind of doubt that anyone will make a Bomberman as desperate as these 3 in the future, not even for the 50th anniversary in 2033. Bomberman is a game concept whose time has passed. It's fun, but a bit restricted as a concept. The only people who remember Bomberman at this point are the ones nostalgic for his 90s incarnation. There's no reason to try to break the series out with a new direction. There's not going to be a 3D open-world Bomberman game, and you're not going to change the character to a wisecracking teenager or some kind of sad dad. No, whatever Bomberman games we get from this point forward, and it's unlikely to ever be that many, will just be about the cute little robot and dropping bombs in a maze while you blow up your friends. And honestly, at this point, that's probably for the best.